Welcome to another edition of Profiles, a program that features people who have made a difference in the School of Liberal Arts at Purdue University. I'm your host, Cheryl Alsbach. Today with us, we have a man who was a pioneer in the development of a radio and broadcasting curriculum at Lafayette Jeff High School in the 1950s, and who has been teaching broadcasting and radio at the high school and college level for nearly 40 years. He is a man who just this year was awarded one of 5 Distinguished Alumni Awards from Purdue University, and is also a recipient of the Sagamore of the Wabash Award, an award given to a citizen of Indiana. It's one of the top awards that is given by the governor of the state. Today, we're pleased to have Bill Fraser with us today. Welcome to the program, Mr. Fraser.
Thank you, Cheryl. I enjoy every opportunity that I can get to talk about radio and television, my first love.
Okay, well, what sparked this first love of yours in radio and television?
Well, we'll go back a long way right now, and briefly, I was 6 years old sitting at the breakfast table, and unbeknownst to me, my mother had sent in a birthday greeting from Aunt Irene and Uncle Glenn in Chicago, WGN, and I was eating breakfast, and I heard my name on the radio for the first time, and I have to quote this to you, but they said, "And we want to wish a happy birthday to little Billy Fraser in Delphi, Indiana." And my mother said I just sat there and dropped my oatmeal and just looked. My face got red. But that was my introduction to radio.
Okay, and how did that progress?
Well, it progressed to the point where I sold 8 subscriptions to Saturday Evening Post, for which they sent me a little microphone. And my father hooked it up to our radio, the old Crosley Dome type, and it worked pretty well. So everybody that came to visit our home, I read news out of the Delphi Journal and played records on an old wind-up phonograph. So that's the way I got started in that.
Okay, now how did that progress into high school and college?
Well, in high school, I was active in speech and the various contests that I was in. And what helped me really to go to college was the fact I won the state oratorical contest for the American Legion. And then I went to college down to that other university down the way for undergraduate work. Started out in pre-med, but I got in the Army and they put me on as an instructor because I'd had ROTC. And when I went back, I had some friends that were working at a radio station. And so they said, "Hey, Bill, you want to try your luck at radio?" I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." So I started out reading the market reports. And I didn't really know what I was reading because, you know, chickens are nervous, butter is unsteady, and so on. But in about 3 weeks, they gave me a show called Request for Rhythm. And at that time, Cheryl, and you're a little old, I'm a little older than you know, but we only had you as the announcer and 2 turntables and the old 78s, and that's what we played. And we did all of the commercials live, all the news was live, and that was really a good beginning. And then I went from there, from IU, from my undergraduate work, and then I started as a speech therapist up in Fort Wayne. Then I came to Jefferson High School in 1953.
Now, how did you get interested in establishing this curriculum at Lafayette Jefferson?
Well, of course, I was involved in speech, and I'd been in radio. I worked at WANE up in Fort Wayne, and incidentally, I'd given my first TV commercial in 1950 for Pepsi-Cola. Got $10 for that. But I knew there was a need for earlier training in radio and television because I could see a big, big future for it. So I started then in 1954. I got a class, a regularly accredited English class under the English, but radio and television. And it was in 1954 that we started that. And we didn't have any radio station at that time, but I had it in my mind that by golly, someday we're going to have it, and eventually we did.
Now, how did it progress from there?
Well, in the progression, they started talking about a new high school about 1962 or something like that. So I thought, here's the deal. I'll get in on the ground floor. So I did, and the procedure of building. And but what they did, the school board's very intelligent move on their part, I think. They gave each department head in charge of planning their area. So I planned with Scholler Architects and with the radio and the television, having in mind, of course, getting an FM station for the high school. And it was a regularly licensed FM station. It's now called WJEF, which put Jeff in the middle of things. And what I did was Bud Scholler told me, he said, "Bill, you're not going to get all this stuff at once." So what we did we submitted to the school board the radio and the television, radio and the classroom and the office. And 3 months later, we submitted the space for the TV and the TV control room, and put them together, and I got all that space. And it's at that time at Jeff, we had sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Well, the course was open to everyone. Of course, I had to audition for them, and most of them could read well, but those who didn't really get into radio would rather work cameras and do exactly what you people are doing here. Then they had that opportunity to do that. And I've had a lot of students that have gone through there, and I'm happy to say that a lot of them are involved in radio and television.
What kind? Anybody we would know? Anyone famous that we might know?
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes, Brian Lamb of C-SPAN is probably my star student, and I had Brian back. He graduated in 1959, but Brian, I'll tell you, one of the sad things, he lost the state championship broadcasting by 1 point. And I think that spurred him on to do more things. But we'd talked about C-SPAN, and when Telstar went up and the program of the American people should know more about actually what their government is doing, which Brian has been very successful at, I'm sure. And I talk to him quite often, and when he comes back home, we always get together. And he loves Purdue University, as I do too.
I bet you do.
Yeah.
What are your feelings about students getting hands-on experience while they're still in college?
I think that's very vital. I think that it's a place to have an opportunity to really learn the basics of announcing. And it is not an easy job. People sitting at home listening to radio think that the person who is on, the radio personality, they no longer call them disc jockeys. The radio personality sits there and listens to music. Well, you probably hear less music when you're operating a radio station because you have the commercials or the public service announcements, or you're getting news together, you're on the phone. All of these things transpire. And as I mentioned before, when I first started in radio in 1948, all we had were the 2 turntables and you. But now, of course, we have the tape, the carts, the cassettes, all these things, very, very high tech. And you have to get started early to really know if you want to do it, because it's a hard taskmaster. I mean, I tell my students that if you're looking at a 40-hour week, forget it. 50, 60-hour week, especially if you get into the news area of radio or television. And you have to be up on things. You've got to know at least a little bit about almost everything.
So you believe not only in learning through your books, but learning by doing it. You can't just learn everything from your books, right? Is that what you're basically saying?
Yes, my philosophy has been hands-on. And if I may use this, that you can read 100 books on swimming, but if you don't get into the water, it doesn't count. So it's the same way with broadcasting. You got to get your feet wet. You got to make some mistakes. That's what I always told my students. Yeah, you'll make mistakes, but don't make the same mistake twice. See, that's the main thing. And one of the times, one of the girls, Jeff, she sneezed on the air. And my engineer later, I never really, ridiculed him. I said, you shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. But we asked her, why did you sneeze? And she said, we said, why didn't you push the cough button? She said, well, I had to sneeze. That's the cough button. I didn't have to cough. So you run into little things like that. And I've had a lot of funny experiences that actually have happened to me. I've introduced Reverend Tuttle as Reverend Turtle. And some of the things we won't mention right here, but they actually happen, and especially in television. One time I was emceeing an amateur show. This was out here at Channel 18, which I still do commercials. But it was an amateur show, and I was emceeing and had to do 2 commercials within the structure of the show. And they brought out the milk and everything. It was for Sunshine Dairy. And I was extolling the virtues of chocolate milk, and I was saying, oh, it's wonderful, tasty, and I opened it and I smelled it. I thought, oh boy. So I drank a little bit of it, and it was sour. I went, that's good.
Well, Mr. Fraser, it's been so interesting talking to you today, and we thank you so much for coming in.
I enjoyed it.
Well, good. I'm glad you did. And we thank you for joining us on this episode of Profiles. I'm Cheryl Alspach. Goodbye.